If you give the government an inch, they will take a mile. Let me repeat that. If you give the government an inch, they will take a mile. Thank you so much for liking your comments and subscribing to the channel. Please share this with your friends. Smash that like button. Smash the subscription bell. Share this with everybody you know. We're trying to make sure people understand that they're not victims, that they are empowered for greatness, and all this stuff that's out here that's telling them otherwise is false and will not benefit them in the end. So please, I appreciate that. Share that. In Proverbs chapter 2, starting in verse 6, it talks about how for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the path of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity in every good path. I'm going to read verses 8 and 9 again from Proverbs chapter 2. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then, only when you understand that God is a source of wisdom, only when you understand that he's a shield of those who walk uprightly, only then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. And I mentioned that verse because I've been thinking a lot about what's been going on, all the injustices that are currently taking place in our country. All the injustices being done to unborn children, the injustices being done to children in inner city, where more children in the city of Chicago were shot and killed, more black children were shot and killed than those who were killed from COVID. All the injustices that are taking place when people are being kicked out of restaurants because they can't show a proof of vaccination. All the injustices that are happening now, unfortunately, at places where there should not be injustice. This one hits home. As you can see, I got my hat on. So whenever I have my hat on, you know I'm about to bring something serious. Recently, there was an injustice that took place at a school locally. Here's the injustice. You had a child who was quarantined, the only one that was quarantined. You had another child who tested positive. The child that was quarantined was being policed by the teachers, unknowingly policed. The parents did not know that the child was being policed. Policed for not wearing a mask. The child was not made aware of that. The school didn't have anything plastered on the wall indicating what is proper masking. So the child was quarantined. And the child missed important events in that child's life. And when the parents spoke up about this, the parents who demonstrated discrimination because there were 4 people sitting at a table and only one person was quarantined. You want to know what the other 2 individuals had in common? They were vaccinated. So this child, number 1, was punished because they did not wear their mask appropriately. Whereas other children in the same environment were doing the same thing. Now, this is not discrimination based on race, no. Discrimination and injustice based solely upon a personal choice as to whether or not that child will get vaccinated. In that earlier video, I talked about the new Jim Crow. This is the new Jim Crow. And unfortunately, it has hit the school system. And sad to say, it has hit Christian private schools, places that should be independent, that should stand on the firm foundation of the gospel, that should not bend their knee to societal whims and societal pressures. But the problem is, a lot of the Christian schools are Christian in name only. They are glorified private schools with just a Christian facade. There's nothing Christian about them. They emphasize academics more than they do Jesus. They emphasize academics more than they do Jesus. And so the children come out worse than they went in. And see, that had me thinking how it must have felt to have been Dr. King. And you want to know why Dr. King wrote that letter from a Birmingham jail? It was in response to a letter that was written in the Birmingham newspaper entitled A Call for Unity, where white clergymen in Birmingham wrote a letter calling for unity and had a thinly veiled reference to Dr. King, calling him an outside agitator. And so Dr. King penned the letter from a Birmingham jail, where one of the famous quotes from that letter is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So to me, when are Christians going to rise up and speak out about all the injustices that are taking place in our nation? Too many are bowing the knee to the culture, afraid to ruffle feathers, afraid to offend people. Because I have to show the love of God. I have to be respectful. You know, Jesus turned over tables, right? You know, Jesus stood for righteousness, right? You know he did, right? And that's why they hated him. Did you understand that? Jesus stood for righteousness. And whenever there's injustice, there is unrighteousness. All of these mandates are unjust. All of these mandates are unjust. And so we have an obligation to stand up to unjust laws. In Mecklenburg County, the county commissioners passed an unjust law saying that churches now, houses of worship, are required to have everyone be masked. That is unjust. That is injustice. That is government overreach. But yet you have plenty of churches that will acquiesce to that. They don't understand. If you give the government an inch, they will take a mile. Let me repeat that. If you give the government an inch, they will take a mile. But yet these weak-kneed, milquetoast Christians are bowing down and acquiescing to everything the government tells them to do. Some churches are still closed.
I didn't think pastors were supposed to talk about politics. You have clearly never stumbled across one of my Facebook videos a day in your life. So the sheriff kept showing up. And he's like, "Hey, I love your videos, bro." He's like, "I'm not going to arrest you, but these idiots keep calling, so we got to come out by way of protocol." They came out every weekend for 2 solid months when we kept going. So he said, "Do you think there's anything you can do?" I said, "Oh, absolutely." So the tent was packed, visitors from all over the place. We normally have 25 states every weekend represented for one service. People that fly and drive, not for Greg Locke, but for the gospel. Because people are hungry and want somebody to be a voice in the wilderness and say what needs to be said. So CBS happened to be there that day, and all the cameras are rolling for the B-roll footage for the documentary, which comes out next month. And so there's no telling what they're going to do with that, especially now that we're on Nancy Pelosi's beautiful hit list. It's a badge of honor. Twitter named me last week with a lifetime ban, praise God. So you're over the target dropping the correct bombs, and so they were all there. And I said, I need to just go on record to say something. I said, look, we are not closing our church come hell or high water. I said, I don't care if the bubonic plague gets resurrected. We are not closing the doors of our church, right? And so I had everybody kind of worked up. And I said, let me explain something to you because I'm serious about what I'm saying. And I said, these people want to quote and they want to know why we're still doing this. And I said, sheriff's here, deputies are here, they're tired of having to show up, so let's just fix this thing right now. And they got like tired of the tick in that room. I said then, and I believe now. I said, and I quote, we so believe in our First Amendment right to show up and worship Jesus in this church, that if you show up at our church and you try to impede upon our First Amendment right, I said, we will meet you at the door with our Second Amendment right because we ain't playing no Democrat games.
Some churches are still closed. It went from 15 days or so to spread to 18 months to stay in your bed. How is that? How is that Christians and Christian schools are allowing themselves, subjecting themselves to unjust laws, to unjust quarantine protocols that make no sense? And they're discriminating against the unvaccinated. They're singling out people who are not vaccinated. That is the whole synopsis of the situation. In summation, they are singling out people and discriminating against people solely based upon their vaccination status. And it is infiltrated the Christian schools. Christian administrators who are more afraid of the public outcry than standing up for righteousness. Christian administrators who know their policies are not being followed, but yet they are more afraid of a health director than they are standing up for righteousness. And they're allowing discrimination to take place in their schools. They are allowing it to take place in their schools. This is blatant discrimination. When you have someone that's sitting in the same environment and the sole reason they're quarantined, the person is healthy, asymptomatic, healthy. The only reason they are quarantined is because they're not vaccinated. And secondary reason is they didn't wear their mask right. They didn't wear their mask right. You have to wear your mask all the way up to your eyeballs to be considered fully masked. By whose definition? The health department? Really? This is wrong. This is wrong. And we have to speak out about it. We have to stand up for righteousness. These laws, the people, look here. I'm sorry to tell everyone. These people have no intention of giving back the rights they've taken from us. No intention. These people have no intention of giving back the rights that have taken from us. No intention. When the government seizes something, it doesn't give it back. And they're using medical emergencies. They're using emergency authorization laws to enact draconian and tyrannical policies. But yet too many Christians are not bold. They're timid. But I read in my Bible that the righteous are bold as a lion. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. And I refuse to sit down and go along just to get along. I refuse. I will speak out. I will not let anyone discriminate against my family. I will not let anyone discriminate against anyone, period. Solely because that person is not vaccinated. %70 of black people are not vaccinated. So automatically discrimination is occurring. In all the big cities, discrimination is occurring against black people because they're not vaccinated. It's a backhanded Jim Crow. It's a backhanded insult. All the gains that we've made over the last 50 years are being wiped out, all in the name of COVID. I will not allow anyone to be discriminated against. And these schools who are weak-kneed and not strong enough to stand up on their own merits to have their own policies should be ashamed of themselves. Christian schools who are more afraid of the health director and the county they reside in instead of adhering to the principles of the kingdom of God. Pastors who are more afraid of offending people than standing up for righteousness. Churches that are more afraid of offending people than standing up for righteousness. Close your doors. Keep your doors closed. Don't call yourself a Christian. That is offensive to me. You're calling yourself a Christian, but you're living contrary to it. That is offensive to me. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. We have the greater one inside of us. No weapon formed against us shall prosper. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. So we will fight. We will continue to fight. We will fight unjust laws. And people like to use Romans 13, the church does, to say, oh, we have to abide by what the government says. No, the government is an instrument for good. It punishes evil. But when the government turns around and calls evil good and good evil, you have a right to stand up against it. You have a right to stand up against unjust laws and unjust policies. You have a right to do that. I will do that. We will do that. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. And to all the schools, all the heads of schools, all the nurses that are following these unjust protocols, the unjust mandates that they do not have the authority to utilize. These nurses do not have the authority to implement quarantine protocols. These nurses do not have the authority to implement quarantine protocols. That is the responsibility of the county health department. We will stand up against that, and we will speak out against it. Period. We will stand up against that. We will speak out against that. And for those of you who go to the same school as my daughter, you know what school that is? Know this, your children are being policed. Know this, your children are being monitored. Know this, your children are being watched. And if you don't speak out about this, if you don't stand up against it, our monies are going to this school. If you don't stand up against this, if you don't speak out against this, our children will suffer the consequences. We do this in love. We do this respectfully, but we do it passionately. We do not hate anybody. We do not disparage anyone, but we will stand up for righteousness. We will speak out against it, and we will fight it, because we are not victims. Our children are not victims. We are empowered for greatness.